Hi there y'all, and welcome to Millennial Travels. In this video, I'm visiting Boston to experience some old charm that only this city on the harbor can offer. Let's get started. On the first day, I arrived at the Boston airport in the PM hours and hopped on the Silver Line, then switched on to the Red Line to get to the station closest to my room. To say this was the easiest ride to get to my room from the airport would be an understatement. The other one that was pretty easy was when I traveled from Baltimore. Now when it came to my Airbnb, it was pretty nice. The house was a little bit older, but it had some nice charm to it, which made it a nice rest after a long flight. After settling down, I went to get groceries and stopped by Cafe Polonia to get some grub. I got up early to do some MBTA research and to get a 7-day pass on my Charlie card. If you want to get more info on the Charlie card, skip to this time code to learn more about it. So after getting my pass, I went to the Franklin Zoo. My timing wasn't the best though, as it was raining and some of the animals were not let out due to the low temperatures, so this was an instance where you should visit the zoo during the better weather conditions. But it was still a treat to see all the animals that were out and about. After the zoo, I walked over to the Samuel Adams Brewery at Jamaica Hill. The tour was short but sweet. The guide gave a brief history of how the Samuel Adams brand came about, along with the philosophy of the beer franchise as well. After the history lecture, the guide taught us how to assess a beer's quality, like someone would do with a wine or a cheese tasting. Now that taste lesson had a reasoning behind it besides giving folks another tool under their belts. The location where this tour was happening turned out to be their main hub for trying out new flavors. Apparently they'll make roughly about 400 new flavors, with only about 1% making the cut every 2 years. Well, some of those beers served on the tour are tasted to determine if they may hit store shelves. After the tour, I headed to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The place was about 3 stories of ritzy glamour, and it felt like what you'd get if you cross a church, a mansion, and a museum all in one spot. The grounds were beautiful, with the garden easily being the highlight of the whole place. Not to say the rooms didn't have any eye-catching designs, but after when you've seen a few rooms, the rest seems to kind of blend together. After the museum, I decided to walk over to Prudential Tower. Now, this is located in the Prudential Center, which in itself is basically a large indoor mall with a ton of places to shop and eat at. My goal though was to go to the Prudential Tower observation deck. 50 floors later, I get to see some amazing views of the Boston area. For those who want more than just views, they have a bar on the 49th and a restaurant on the 48th floor. At the time of my visit, it was at night and misty, making it a bit harder to get some certain shots of the city, but it was still great to see the night lights of the Boston area from that observation deck. So after the tower, I headed northeast to go to a place where everyone knows her name. Fast forward the rainy walk and I arrived at the Cheers bar. The place was busy, so expect some long wait times during the weekend hours. The food I got was decent, with my only real complaint is that the cups they use for the beer isn't served in a mug like the ones in the show. Instead they opted for one of these little mugs that seemed to be more for coffee or some other type of drink, which I'll have to be honest was a little bit disappointing, especially after watching the series from beginning to end. But overall, it was still fun being able to visit this iconic spot after so many years of wanting to stop on by. I hopped on the number 8 bus for the southeast end of Boston with the goal of seeing the JFK Library. Once in the area, I got some shots of the calf pasture pumping station to get that architectural fix. I then walked by a local college to reach the Commonwealth Museum. The museum covers important events of pre-American history to events after the formation of the nation as well. The highlight of this museum was easily the historical documents on display, from the likes of Winthrop to a copy of the Declaration of Independence. On a more random note, the building also serves as a state record center for the local area. With the Boston area history covered, I walked over to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. Unfortunately, the place was closed. Turns out, you have to do a group reservation Tuesday through Fridays. Next to the Institute was the JFK Library, which was open at that time. While it has a library in its name, it's more of a museum dedicated to one of the most popular presidents in American history. The JFK Library was like the ultimate spot to go if you need to get your JFK fix in, and would be a great way to learn more about the president outside of some video documentary on the man. The exhibits contain a wide array of materials from or about the president, as well as displays that give the proper context in which JFK lived in and helped shape. I definitely recommend this museum for those who want to dig more into the JFK era of American history. After the museum, I threw on my rain poncho to walk along the water's edge to reach Castle Island. Along the way, I took a lot of photos and videos of this scenic walk to the historic fort. I'd lie though if it wasn't tiring, what with the rain and all constantly landing on me, but it was the best way that I could think of at the time to see all the cool things along the way. So fast forward the first leg of the journey, I reached the Pleasure by Flagpole. I got to see a cool scene of the Head Island Causeway flanked on both sides by the sea water, with a plane flying overhead every 2 minutes or so. When I hit Head Island, I took my shots and then proceeded to Fort Independence on Castle Island. The walk to both islands were a lot of fun to do, as the paths were fairly long, with both destinations feeling far off. But more so, it felt like a movie in that you see a character walk a long distance to reach the next leg of their journey. Upon arriving at Castle Island, I walked along the east end to see the Bay Area along with the boats cruising on by. Once I got to the west end, I grabbed some food at Sullivan's Castle Island to fill my belly up. The staff were fantastic, but I just wish they had some seating on the inside for those lovely hard weather days. After the quiet bite, I went to the front entrance of the fort only to find out that it was closed. From my understanding, they do tours for a greater part of the year, with me just missing their last tour by a couple of weeks. While it did suck to find out the hard way that the place was closed, despite what Google was saying, it was still nice to travel there because I got to see a lot of cool stuff along the way, and just to feel the scope of this huge fort. After the fort, I hopped on a bus heading towards Harpoon Brewery near some of the docks of Boston. With me being soaked from the rain and still tired, I decided to get a flight of unique flavors and a nice big pretzel with some cheesy garlic sauce for a nice taste experience. My favorite part of this experience was just getting to relax, enjoying some treats while watching the rain pitter-patter on the windows with folks going about their day.
You're on your first step towards...
I hopped on the Red Line to Boston to get to Long Wharf to get on one of those historic boat tours of the harbor. The boat itself had a lot of seating, but luckily for me, there wasn't many folks at the 10 a.m. tour that day. For those who like laid-back rides with a bit of history, this ride would be a fantastic thing for you. It starts at the Long Wharf, then sails to Fort Independence, where it then heads to the USS Constitution before returning to Long Wharf. If you're in Boston for a short stay, I would definitely recommend this. After the cruise, I did some walking around the harbor's edge till I reached Quincy Market and Faneuil Hall. Quincy Market felt like a mall food court in the main hall and a tourist shop trap on the sides. Faneuil Hall had some touristy vendors on the ground floor with a mini history exhibit downstairs. For me, I enjoyed relaxing near Quincy Market, watching as the yellow fall leaves float about the footpaths with these historic buildings as a backdrop. It definitely had the right vibes for that midday relaxing escape from the humdrum trappings of life. Just down the street a little ways was the Old State House, where I got to stand at the Boston Massacre site where one of the biggest events involved with American Revolution took place. This is where I started part of the Freedom Trail to see some of the famous locations till I reached Acorn Street at Beacon Hill, which is one of the oldest cobblestone streets in the US. If you happen to find yourself in Boston with some time to spare, be sure to check it out, as it's one of the most scenic city walks in the US. With the day still young, I decided to do the Prudential Tower again to get a view of the city during the day, where I was able to get some better shots of the Boston area and relax a bit before the next exciting spot on this spooky day in October. While I was surfing my phone of things to do, I found out that there was going to be a Halloween celebration in Salem, Massachusetts. Seeing as it was Halloween, I got a round-trip train ticket for this famous witch hunting town. Upon arriving, I was greeted with a town in the full swing of the Halloween spirit. Honestly, I had a lot of fun walking around this place, as it felt like those days as a kid walking through my neighborhood, all dressed up, getting candy, while seeing other families doing much the same thing. Also, it felt like I was going through the film Hocus Pocus. Oh, quick edit, it turned out a lot of the places in Hocus Pocus was actually filmed in Salem, Massachusetts. So when it came down to it, I really honestly wasn't planning on visiting the town during this whole trip, but because of how that day was going and because it was Halloween, I decided to do it. So it was an awesome way of capping off the day on one of my favorite holidays of the year. I hopped on the Red Line with the intent of seeing what Harvard was like. Unfortunately, we had to stop near Longfellow Bridge because a train ahead of us had some sort of issue. So after waiting for a good while, I decided that, well, maybe I should change my plans for the day. Instead of starting off my day with Harvard, I began my day with the Museum of Science. Honestly, the Museum of Science is just alright. It seems more geared towards families with young kids, so I quickly just went through the place to head to the next cool spot on my list. Well, after a bit of walking, I made it to the USS Constitution. What makes this ship unique is the many successful battles it's been a part of, but nowadays it's known as the oldest active military ship still afloat. One of the things I loved about this ship was being able to walk around the deck and climb one floor lower to check out the interior of this sturdy little duck. There's just something about being around something with this much history that just fascinates me. I just love it. With that sturdy old duck out of the way, I skipped on over to Bunker Hill. At first, I thought the place was closed because of the scaffolding at the top, but it turned out they were just doing some restoration on the tower. Luckily for me, I was able to get a chance to climb the tower, which made up for when I wasn't able to climb the one in Baltimore. After the tower, I had quite the appetite for the day, so I hopped on a bus to stop by the Boston Sail Loft, where I got to enjoy 2 fantastic bowls of clam chowder. Unlike the previous day, the Red Line didn't have any issues, so I was able to tour Harvard and MIT to get into that college feel again. The grounds and buildings of both schools were beautiful. I liked Harvard's old charming buildings and MIT for the fantastic view of the Charles River. After getting my fill of higher education, I went on a tour of Fenway Park, where I got to walk around one of the oldest baseball parks in the nation, getting some nice shots in of the park while learning some fun facts about those early days of the park and the many additions that were made to update it. I would definitely recommend it if you're into baseball or the Red Sox. With my baseball itch satisfied, I strolled on over to the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston to experience some of the finer things in life at one convenient location. The place was massive, roughly about 3 floors dedicated to showing off artifacts and pieces from various cultures throughout history. The sheer variety on display was what first took me by surprise, as some of the museums I've been to will have basically a limited amount of items on display that aren't really that big. But with this museum, there were some statues that were as tall as the statue of David to paintings that could easily cover a whole wall of a family-sized home. My favorite part though was just being able to sit back and relax while appreciating the small details in some of the more busy canvases. This day, I was wanting it to be a little bit lazier than the previous days, so I decided to start it off with the Freedom Trail to walk the portions I didn't get to see earlier in the trip. This was especially fun for me as it was easy to imagine someone else like me walking through the same area all those years ago. All the sightseeing eventually had me winding up at one of the main reasons I came to Boston. So with the Boston Tea Party Museum, the main draw is being able to get on the replicas of the famous ships involved with the Tea Party and being able to throw tea into the harbor. The people working there are dressed in time period clothing to get folks more immersed in the setting while talking about the events leading up to the party on the water. One thing that surprised me was how small the ships were. For some reason, all these years, I sort of imagined those guys getting on these humongous ships and dumping a stupid amount of tea into the harbor. Despite the fantasy meeting reality, I still enjoy getting a close representation of the ships of how they were like all these years later. After getting a feel for the place, I decided that the best thing to do next was to get me a drink and kick back and enjoy the view at one of the biggest starting points in American history. This day was pretty simple. I just took the transit to the airport and basically just waited until my plane arrived so that I can hop on it and get on home. I think the easiest way to finish this off is how all these trips started when I booked my first solo trip to Miami, which quickly grew into more places like Philadelphia, San Juan, Chicago, Baltimore, and then finally Boston. The only thing I can really say about the experience was that it was unbelievable, and that I'm happy that I got the chance to do all of it in 2023. I'm hoping that I'll have more opportunities like this in the future in 2024 and future years. Maybe I'll get the chance to go somewhere outside of the US. Who knows? So one of the biggest things I would suggest is familiarize yourself with the transit map of the Boston area. There's a ton of train, subway, and bus routes that'll get you right where you need to be, or at least within walking distance. The easiest thing for an out-of-towner is to get the Charlie card, which you can get at most MBTA stations. Be sure to ask an MBTA employee for help if you're having any issues. Well, with that card though, you can go to the ticket machines to load the card with funds or a pass. I opted for the 7-day pass as it gave me unlimited rides for the days I had it, which I used it a lot. When it comes to finding out what station you need to be at, I used Google Maps, which was pretty dang accurate in getting me to where I needed to go using the public transit. For the most part, it didn't really fail me that often. When it did, it was kind of like a rare occurrence, but for the most part, it always worked for me. But with that said, y'all stay safe and have a good one.